Hi, I'm Terry Ohlson-Martin, and I'm the director with New Hampshire Family Voices. And today we're going to talk about supported decision-making. We were really lucky earlier this year when we held an all-day conference on supported decision-making. And before I really get into the meat of things, I want to acknowledge Jonathan Martinez, who was our keynote speaker. He gave us permission to use his slides and all of the work with his presentation so that we could get as much knowledge as possible out there. And I've made great use of that permission, so I want to make sure to acknowledge his wealth of information and just how much I look to him as the guru for supported decision-making. We're really lucky to have him, and I would encourage anybody to learn from him whenever they have the opportunity. So how did we get here? Why are we talking about supported decision-making? We got here because what we primarily used in New Hampshire prior to this was guardianship. And guardianship means obtaining the legal authority to make decisions for another person. So that other person has no basic rights to make their own decisions when somebody else has guardianship. They would encourage, the courts would encourage you to talk to the individual and take their expectations and their choices and their desires into consideration. But the guardian truly has the ability to make all of the decisions for the person. So it's a pretty significant impact on a person. And supported decision-making started to be part of the law because of a case that Jonathan had with Jenny Hatch. And there's now 14 states that have, and there actually may be more, but there was 14 the last time I looked a month or two ago, that have actually put supported decision-making into their legislation. So that is being used more and more. And we really have to thank Jenny for that. I'd encourage you to look up that case and learn more about her. She's a fascinating young lady. So let's talk a little bit about guardianship so that you have a better idea of the differences between the two and why supported decision-making is definitely a preferred option for anybody that can use it and or has the capacity to learn to use it. So guardianship can be full guardianship or plenary, they also call it, which means that you have guardian over the person. You have, it's used in the majority of the cases. Almost always people will go for full guardianship. You have a list of things that you check off as to what you're going to be, what decisions you're going to be making on behalf of the person. There's also guardianship over the estate. This is especially important if there is money. So if, for instance, the person has any kind of a trust fund, then you would want guardianship over the estate. It's not something that I did in my situation with my son because his finances are finances where there's a rep payee. So it really wasn't necessary. Should he win megabucks and get millions of dollars, I will file immediately for guardianship over the estate. But it's something that you have to consider. Do you want just guardianship over the person or over the estate? Perhaps the individual can make a lot of decisions about their life, but finances is a more difficult concept, so you go for guardianship over the estate. You can do temporary guardianship, which means my young person is 18 and we're thinking this is only going to be something that has to happen for a short time because of a situation that exists. So that's a possibility. Unfortunately, all of those possibilities still take away the individual's right to make their own decisions. So what we're hoping is that more and more people will look at supported decision-making as an option that doesn't take away those basic rights. So in January of 2022, the legislation passed that, oh gee, and see, there it is on my slide, that actually establishes and recognizes supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. So right in the legislation now, it says that families who are, or any individual who's filing for guardianship has to look at supported decision-making as a potential alternative. Could this person benefit from using something that is less, I call it invasive, because it's not taking over so much of the individual's rights? Could they work that way rather than giving up all those rights? And if so, then you use supported decision-making. If you can't, then you may be requested to explain to the courts why you're not using supported decision making. So I encourage all families to really think about it, talk about it, and consider the possibilities and the options before just going straight to guardianship. If your young person is in school and they have an IEP team and they're starting to talk about future planning as you're transitioning and what's going to happen for this young person, and somebody mentions guardianship, they also have to mention supported decision making. This is new for schools. This is not something that they've historically done. Schools didn't know what supported decision making was in a lot of cases. So I am asking people to use some grace when you're working with the schools. Professionals are learning about this just as families are learning about it. And if you have information you may want to share it with them as well, because the more we can all learn, the better. The other thing that I would mention is that supported decision making wasn't illegal before. A lot of people used, I shouldn't say a lot, some people used other forms. They would use medical forms or power of attorney forms or other types of legal documents so that they could assist somebody in making decisions rather than going for guardianship. The key point now is it is part of the legislation, and you may be asked about it when you go into the court system. So I think it will put a little more pressure on people to consider alternatives to guardianship. And if you're going to go into court and you're going to possibly be asked about this alternative to guardianship, you want to know what it is. Schools also want to know more about it before they have to talk to you about it. So what I would like to share is this piece that is in the legislation that really says what schools have to do. When the school starts to talk about guardianship or any next steps, they're supposed to make available resources to assist in establishing a supported decision-making agreement. In fairness, they don't have a lot of resources yet. They have what we've been providing, what they can find. They have a document that was provided to them by the Department of Education that just gives the basic outline of supported decision-making, and it gives a draft copy of the form that was in the legislation. So your school team is going to be somebody that you work with to find information, to come up with resources, and to see how this would work for your individual. And it's going to be different for everybody because every young person is different and has different capacities. So what you may be putting together may not look like anybody else's that they've ever seen. I think it's a good thing that the law directed the schools to do this, because for many people, this will be the first time you hear about it. But we also have to recognize that we're all learning this together. I'm hoping in another year I can do another chat that is completely different and says everybody knows about it and this many people are using it. So we talk about using it. What is it? Supported decision-making. This is the definition that Jonathan uses. And he says we can make up our own definition, but I think this one works. It's a recognized alternative to guardianship through which people with disabilities use friends, family members, and other professionals to help them understand the situations and the choices they face, so they may make their own decisions. They make their own decisions without the need for a guardian. So it really is clear when you read this that supported decision-making is very unique to each individual because we all make our own decisions individually. What does it look like in practice? Well, this can make people a little nervous because we are very used to guardianship where it's filed with the courts, it's very specific, and we all know who's making the decision. Supported decision-making, we should still all know who's making the decision, the individual is, but there's nothing filed with the courts. A person can have more than one supporter. You may have somebody, I like to use the examples within my own family. If I was going to have a supporter for financial reasons, I would pick one of my kids. If I was going to have a supporter for, let's think, for designing my home or picking out my clothes or any kind of that personal, how things are going to look, I would pick a different one of my kids. They have very different skills and different capacities in how they run their lives. So I know what their priorities are and what their how they would be helpful. And most of us know that with our friends. You know, you kind of pick somebody based on, you know, what their skills are. If you're going to go buy a car, you pick somebody you know who's a mechanic or who has experience with that kind of thing. And that's what you can do with your supporters. You pick the supporter that you think has the best knowledge to help you. The forms can be notarized, or they can have 2 witnesses. And the witnesses should not be or cannot be one of the supporters. So you need to have other people. You don't have to use the form that was in the legislation. You can come up with your own form as long as it has the components that are necessary from the legislation. The other key part that may make some people nervous is that the individual with disabilities can end that relationship at any time. They are not mandated to have this relationship for 6 months, for a year. They don't have to go to the courts. They can say, no, this is not working. I'm done. I'm going to have Joe be my supporter now instead of Steve. And that makes perfect sense. If you decide you don't want to take somebody's advice or you don't want to work with them anymore, you should have the ability to not do that. The other thing is it doesn't mean that the individual has to follow the suggestions of it or advice from the supporter. I mean, think about it. How many times do we ask people for advice? We get 2 or 3 people's advice and then we go off and we still do what we wanted to do. We didn't listen. That's okay. That's normal. And we get to do that. The key piece is that there are people giving you information that you need to make your decision. The focus has to be on the decision-making process. It's not on the end result. So the supporters shouldn't be coming in with, you have to do this because they believe that's the best thing to do. They should be talking about how you get to making that decision. They explain the options, the possibilities, and the consequences of any decision. We all make really stupid decisions and we deal with the consequences. And this is one of those times when it may be hard as family members to back up and let others make those decisions, but it's what we do. It can exist with guardianship. I have some hesitation about saying that because it's not the ideal model. It's not really what we want. I look at this and think, well, if you have guardianship and you're considering the possibilities of supported decision-making being a process you want to get to, that you think the individual perhaps could make more of their own decisions, and you want to switch to that, because you already have guardianship, I can envision going into the courts and saying, you know what, I've had guardianship. I don't think I need it anymore. I think he can do it on his own. And the judge going, what? Why? How do you get here? What happened? How did you make this decision? That's where I think supported decision-making would be really helpful to have said, well, we've been using this model. We've been working together as a team. We have these other 3 people that are his supporters, and they're going through decisions that have to be made, and this is how he's making decisions. Being able to really show how supported decision-making has worked for someone. The intent was not for people to go to court, get guardianship, and use supported decision-making. The legislation does not say you can't, but it's not what it says. And it's not the ideal. Supported decision-making is also a fluid process. It's going to change over time. The supporters are going to change. As people learn and become more accustomed to making decisions, they're going to perhaps need a supported decision maker less, or they may need a supported decision maker in different areas. So it's always changing, but it begins and it ends with the individual that's being supported. They're the person that gets to make the decisions about who the supporters are, when they're going to help them, how they're going to help them, as well as what their ultimate decisions are. So how do you prepare for supported decision-making? You know, we make decisions at home. We make it, you know, for young people that are in school, college, whatever, any kind of training situation, your social life. We're always making decisions. We have to think about how we get there. How do we learn to make decisions? And I love this next slide because I think most of us don't think about how we make decisions. So I did this little research to find out what the list is. And I love sharing this. So how do we make decisions? Well, it feels right. We follow our gut. We decide based on how we feel what the decision is. How many of us do that? The wait and see decision maker. You wait as long as possible. Sometimes you don't even have to make a decision if you wait long enough because it gets made for you, right? Or you go along with others. You decide based on what everybody else is doing. I think my parents called that peer pressure, but I'm not sure there was a lot of pressure as much as it was easier to do it that way. You do what's least risky. There are always those people who want to take the safe route, don't take any chances. And then there's the rest of us who decide impulsively. We don't think it through. We don't ask questions, just like, yep, that's what I'm going to do. That's my thing. And then you wonder why you have the consequences that you have. And then there are those people who will think it through, consider the options, the pros and the cons, and carefully consider their decisions. The reality is all of us do all of these at different times. I can't think of anybody that always makes their decisions the same way. And sometimes circumstances impact how we make our decision. But when you read this and you think about this, it kind of makes it a little scary, some of the decisions that we're allowed to make as we start adulting. But it also really recognizes that our young people need to learn how to make their decisions in this multitude of ways, and that none of them are absolutely wrong or absolutely right. Sometimes I think learning how to make decisions happens by making decisions and then finding out what didn't work and, ooh, I should have done it differently before. Last time. And so now I'll try it this way this time. And then that one bites you. So what are the skills of a decision maker? You have to have priorities or a goal. You have to be able to consider the pros and cons of a decision. And you have to be able to listen, preferably with an open mind. These are the things that you have to think about when you're considering your young person's capacity to work with a supported decision maker. Do they have their own priorities and goals? Of course, most people do. I can think of very few people who don't. Can they consider the pros and cons of their goals? And can they listen and comprehend another person's information? I don't even want to say advice, but the information that they're going to take. How do you teach decision making? It's really something that I don't think we always spend a lot of time thinking about, but we're going to need to if we're going to teach our young people with disabilities to take on the world and make all their own decisions. We have to start early and we have to never stop. We have to do it all the time. Problem solving and decision making are two separate things. I think that's really important to learn. When you're problem solving, you're being forced to make a decision because the condition is already here. It's beyond your control. You have to make a decision. Decision making can mean that you're choosing to make a decision because you want something to happen. It's not happening now, but you're looking to create something, right? So they're really two different processes. We talk a lot about problem solving because our kids come to us with an issue, right? So that you help them work it through. But what about getting to the point before they have the issue? How do we do that? So we have to start thinking about that. We do it with our schools. We do it in our families. We can't leave it up to schools to teach all our kids how to make decisions. That's a parental role as well. We have to all do it together. It has to be a partnership. And then the hardest one, we have to avoid rescuing. We absolutely have to let our young people make decisions and make mistakes, because that's what we all did. Anybody that didn't make a mistake, call me up. I'll tell you what mistake you made. It was that you called me to tell me you didn't make a mistake. But absolutely, everybody makes them. And I think we have to allow, I know we have to allow for it so that our young people can grow and become the best functioning adult that they can become. So how do we make supported decision-making work? Well, we have to teach our kids how to make decisions. We have to help them understand the information, the issues, and the choices that they have. We have to work with our individual supporter to work with the young people so that they're focusing their attention on the decision-making, that they're weighing their options, and that they're ensuring that decisions are based on individual preferences, that individual's preferences, not the supporter's individual preferences. We have to, the supporter has to help to be able to interpret and or communicate the decisions that the individual has made to other people. So if you're helping somebody, if you're a supporter and you're helping somebody make a decision that's going to involve a bank, you may have to go with that person to the bank and talk about what this young person is trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. It can be the same with a medical person. It can be the same in purchasing something at a store, right? So your job as a supporter is to really work with the individual so that they can make their decisions and they can get that across to the rest of the world. Supported decision-making in New Hampshire is a fabulous opportunity for our young people. And I really hope that everybody will consider it, will try it. You don't have to stick with it forever. If you go down the road of supported decision-making and it doesn't work, and this person really cannot make decisions that the decision has to affect their well-being, and you really believe that they need guardianship, you can do it. You can file for guardianship at any point. So don't jump right on the guardianship bandwagon if you think there's a possibility of using supported decision-making. Maybe you try supported decision-making while they're in high school. Pull out that form and work with somebody when they're 17. How would this work? So that by the time they're 18, if it isn't or isn't going to work. I really just want to encourage you to consider it. If you have any questions, feel free to call New Hampshire Family Voices and ask for Terry, 271-4525, and I would love to talk to you about it.